Static screams through the comms channel. A raw, unedited distress call bleeding into a frequency that should be secure. On the tactical map, a solitary blue dot, an American ship, sits helpless in the Mediterranean. Suddenly, the friendly green dots swarming it lock their targeting radars. They open fire. The blue dot begins to vanish. This is a locked-room murder mystery where the cops are the killers, and the judge sitting on the bench personally ordered the hit. Look closely at this digital slaughter. If you believe your uniform, your flag, or your passport guarantees your safety in a combat zone, you are mathematically wrong. You are not a person. You are a geopolitical asset, a variable in a cold mechanical equation of risk assessment. When your death becomes more profitable to the state than your survival, the rules of engagement are rewritten. Your distress calls will be purposefully ignored by the very people sworn to protect you. Today, we are tearing down the official narrative. By forensically reconstructing 2 hours of pure hell aboard the USS Liberty using declassified signals intelligence, we are handing you the ultimate decoder ring. You are going to learn exactly how Allied governments systematically sanitize a crime scene. We will show you the blueprint of a cover-up, revealing how a deliberate, coordinated massacre is repackaged and sold to the global public as a tragic, unavoidable accident. The sterile glow of the tactical map fades into blinding reality. We are looking directly through the crosshairs of a fighter jet gun camera. The Mediterranean sun glints off the calm, glassy water below. In the center of the frame, a massive vessel crawls along the horizon, flying a freshly hoisted, oversized 5-by-8-foot American flag. The intercept operator monitoring the frequency hears the pilot's breathing. They hear the weapons system achieve a hard mechanical lock. The camera violently shudders. The jet unleashes a torrent of 30mm cannon fire, designed specifically to shred unarmored flesh and delicate communication arrays. In stark black and white, meat and metal explode across the superstructure. Through the headset, the intercept operator does not hear the chaos of an accidental skirmish. They hear the cold, methodical rhythm of an execution. The front line of this war has just collapsed directly onto an unarmed American deck. The timestamp on this slaughter reads June 8, 1967. The attack commences at precisely 1:58 in the afternoon local time. The USS Liberty is not trespassing. It is cruising legally in international waters, 13 nautical miles, or almost 15 standard miles, off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula. The ship is exactly where the Pentagon ordered it to be, acting as a floating antenna to vacuum up the electronic chaos of the escalating 6-day war. This is the anomaly that breaks the official alibi. The weather is flawless, visibility is limitless, stretching unbroken to the horizon. The Liberty is unmistakably American, flying a standard United States flag from the halyard. And when the first volley of cannon fire shreds that fabric, the desperate crew manages to hoist a massive holiday ensign, a banner so large it is meant to be seen from miles away. Yet the incoming fighters continue their strafing runs without hesitation. The intercept operator analyzes the acoustic signature of the strike. The first wave consists of French-built Mirage 3 jets, but they are not dropping conventional bombs to sink a warship. They are deploying rockets and armor-piercing rounds with surgical precision. The ordnance is explicitly selected for a very specific objective: to blind and deafen the vessel. They are systematically dismantling the ship's ability to see the attackers or broadcast a cry for help. The speed of the decapitation is terrifying. Within the first 3 minutes of the engagement, the command bridge of the Liberty is turned into an absolute slaughterhouse. The captain is severely wounded, and the helmsman is neutralized. The ship's tactical chain of command is instantly and violently severed. Blood pools around the helm as the vessel loses steering control. It is no longer a commissioned U.S. Navy asset. It is a bleeding, drifting target, waiting for the next wave. The forensic timeline makes no sense. The official historical record will later claim this was a tragic case of battlefield confusion, a simple misidentification in the fog of war. But the intercept operator, listening to the crisp, calm voices of the attacking pilots, knows the fog of war does not exist here. The sky is crystal clear. The target is moving at a pathetic crawl. The flag is practically painting the sky red, white, and blue. The evidence contradicts the alibi. We are confronted with the paradox of the sun. It was the clearest day of the year in the Mediterranean theater. The attacking pilots had hours to observe, photograph, and identify the slow-moving silhouette below them. The Liberty was bristling with highly classified, instantly recognizable communication antennas. It looked like absolutely nothing else in the region. The visual data was absolute, yet the trigger was pulled. The official narrative is already collapsing. So, we must ask the question that the military tribunals desperately tried to bury under mountains of redacted paperwork. How do you accidentally mistake a top-secret, heavily modified American intelligence-gathering ship for an obsolete, rusted Egyptian horse carrier? The mathematical probability is 0. This was not a tragic failure of target identification by an overzealous squadron. This was a premeditated, surgically executed assassination of a United States Navy vessel. And the most terrifying part of this crime scene is not that a close strategic ally authorized the strike. The true horror lies in the motive. To understand why a superpower would allow its own sailors to be butchered in broad daylight, we have to look past the blood on the deck. We have to look at the machines spinning in the classified compartments below. The Liberty was killed because of what it could hear. So, what exactly was America listening to that warranted a death sentence? The Mirages did not just spray the deck with 30mm rounds at random. They surgically targeted the communication arrays. They came to blind us. This targeted mutilation forces a chilling realization. We have to ask exactly what the Liberty was capable of broadcasting back to Washington that warranted such a precise, desperate decapitation strike. Step away from the burning bridge and descend into the lightless belly of the hull. Welcome to the classified space known as the Moon Room. To the signals intelligence operator, strapped into a heavy headset, the war is not a visual spectacle. It is a dense matrix of sound. Racks of vacuum tube receivers radiate a suffocating heat, and heavy magnetic tape drives spin relentlessly. The official Navy registry lists this vessel as a Belmont-class technical research ship, formally designated as AGT-R5. That is a bureaucratic fiction, a cover story meant to placate port authorities. In reality, this floating steel box is a mobile listening post for the National Security Agency. It is the most sophisticated electronic vacuum cleaner in the Mediterranean theater. This ship was never designed to fight. It is effectively a naked asset swimming in a war zone. The entire defensive capability of the Liberty consists of 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns. Against supersonic jet aircraft, those weapons are practically ornamental. The hull has no heavy armor. The crew relies entirely on the political shield of the United States flag. We are looking at a floating hard drive. Its only armor is its utility to the Empire. The intelligence operator does not need a rifle, because he can hear a whisper from an enemy tank commander 300 miles away. The value of this ship is measured in gigabytes of intercepted secrets, not tonnage or firepower. And those secrets are highly radioactive. The crown jewel of this intelligence-gathering platform is the TRSS-COMM system. This is a massive, 45-foot parabolic dish mounted on the deck. It uses a bleeding-edge technique called moon bounce. The operator points this giant dish directly at the moon, using the lunar surface as a passive reflector to bounce microwave signals across the curvature of the Earth. This lunar relay is not a science experiment. It is a dedicated pipeline of raw, unfiltered intelligence flowing directly to the Pentagon in real time. Every encrypted radio call, every radar pulse, every desperate plea from a besieged bunker is captured, processed, and fired into space. The Liberty does not just observe the battlefield. It consumes it whole. The operational mandate given to this crew was absolute. The 6-day war is exploding across the Middle East, redrawing borders in blood. The Liberty was ordered to park right on the edge of the inferno and vacuum up every stray electronic emission. In modern warfare, the radio spectrum is the actual front line. If you control the spectrum, you control reality. Through the headset of the intercept operator, the geopolitical chaos translates into a symphony of data. They are intercepting scrambled tactical radio traffic. They are logging the pulse repetition frequencies of early warning radars. They are pulling encrypted diplomatic cables right out of the airwaves. Nothing moves in the desert without generating a tangible electronic signal. The placement of the ship is a masterpiece of aggressive espionage. The Liberty is cruising a mere 13 nautical miles, or almost 15 standard miles, off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula. By holding this line, the ship sits legally outside territorial waters, protected by international maritime law, while physically acting as a parasite on the region's communication grid. From this vantage point, the operator can legally capture the telemetry of every single troop movement and artillery strike in the Sinai theater. You are not just watching the war. You are tracking the operational pulse of entire armies. You know where the armor is massing. You know which airfields are launching strikes. You know the exact classified coordinates of the front line. This is the mathematical equation of the crime. If you know the exact troop movements, you know the true intent of the commanders. You know who is breaking ceasefires. You know who is preparing a surprise offensive. The intelligence operator in the moon room holds the absolute, unvarnished truth of the war. And in high-stakes geopolitics, the truth is a lethal liability. Now the tactical logic of the initial strike becomes terrifyingly clear. You do not sink a ship to hide a secret. You blind it first. The Mirages shredded the parabolic dish and the antennas because the real threat was not the hull. The threat was the signal. But even as the ship burns, the operator is desperately trying to establish a connection. The real fight for survival is just beginning. The fight for survival is no longer about dodging shrapnel. It is about piercing the electronic dark. You have seen the colossal intelligence capabilities of this floating fortress, but now you are witnessing the surgical methodology used to rip its eyes out. To the naval damage control officer bleeding on the deck, the silence on the radio is heavier than the smoke in the corridors. The attackers are not just sinking a hull. They are erasing a broadcast. The bridge is an absolute inferno. A radio man, caked in explosive dust and human tissue, frantically spins the dials on a heavy transceiver. He is punching in the emergency codes, expecting the clean snap of a secure connection. Instead, the speaker vomits a howling, mechanical screech. This is the electronic fingerprint of murder. You cannot accidentally isolate a proprietary broadcast channel. You have to hunt it down. As the first wave of 30mm cannons tears the superstructure to shreds, the survival protocol is agonizingly simple. Call for the cavalry. The United States 6th Fleet is stationed just a few hundred miles away, packed with supersonic interceptors. The radio operators attempt to transmit a high-priority, flash override distress signal. It should take less than 4 seconds to summon the wrath of an empire. But the signal bounces back. They switch channels, and the panic sets in. 5 specific American tactical distress frequencies are completely dead. They are being actively smothered by a massive, sawtooth electronic signal. This is not atmospheric interference, and it is not the collateral static of a combat zone. This is a targeted electronic garrote. An invisible wall of microwave radiation is being pumped into the exact bandwidths the United States Navy relies on for survival. Think of the forensic math required to pull this off. To smother 5 proprietary communication lanes, you must deploy advanced electronic warfare platforms. You must calculate the frequency hopping of a Belmont-class research ship in real time. The howling sound, bleeding from the bridge speakers, is the sound of premeditation. A random military strike does not pack a bespoke jamming array optimized for American naval hardware. The damage control officer realizes the terrifying truth. The enemy knows exactly who they are shooting at. To jam these specific frequencies, the attacking force required deep, prior knowledge of highly classified United States Navy communication protocols. This is the anomaly that breaks the official narrative in half. You do not accidentally mistake a target while simultaneously deploying its own classified countermeasures against it. We are inside a locked room murder, and the killer has brought the exact master key required to disable the alarm. The men bleeding out on the linoleum are not victims of the fog of war. They are the subjects of a clinical isolation protocol. Every escape route, both physical and electromagnetic, has been mathematically calculated and severed. The ship is effectively a ghost, burning in plain sight, but completely invisible to the fleet. The air in the lower decks is suffocating, thick with cordite and the metallic tang of vaporized copper. The damage control teams are fighting a two-front war, the physics of combustion tearing through the hull, and the total operational blindness. Without coordination, the fire suppression teams are just guessing where the bulkheads will collapse next. They are cut off from command, cut off from the fleet, and rapidly running out of oxygen. Desperation forces a brutal kind of genius. If the primary and secondary tactical nets are choked by the sawtooth jamming, the crew has to build a bypass. Under continuous aerial bombardment, surrounded by the bodies of their crewmates, the survivors jury-rig a shattered transmitter. They are physically splicing melted coaxial cables and routing a distress call through a tertiary frequency, praying for a gap in the electronic blanket. The timeline is measured in heartbeats and impact tremors. The electronic warfare aircraft circling above cannot perfectly blanket every single kilohertz of the spectrum indefinitely. There are micro-fissures in the jamming wall. The radio man is dialing manually, riding the static, hunting for a sliver of clean air. The damage control officer watches the transmitter tubes glow, knowing this is the final roll of the dice before the hull gives way. A frequency clears. Just for a fraction of a second, the sawtooth howl drops, and the channel opens. The operator hammers the transmission key. "Any station, this is Rockstar. We are under attack by unidentified jet aircraft and require immediate assistance." That single transmission, pushed through a spliced wire while the ship's armor melts around them, is the only thing that alerts the outside world to the systematic dismantling of the vessel. That microscopic burst of telemetry is a catastrophic failure for the assassins. The isolation protocol is broken. The distress call reaches the aircraft carrier Saratoga, and suddenly, the geopolitical vacuum is breached. The dying men on the Liberty have forced the United States military to look directly at the crime scene. The attackers no longer have the luxury of time, and the slow bleed of an aerial strafing run is no longer viable. The equation on the battlefield instantly mutates. Blinding the target has failed. The United States Navy knows a ship is under fire, even if they do not yet know the identity of the executioners. For the forces orchestrating this massacre, the surgical approach is over. They must obliterate the evidence before the Sixth Fleet arrives. The skies empty out, but the water begins to churn. The hunters are moving in for the kill shot. The distress signal has punched a hole in the electronic jamming, but salvation is hundreds of miles away. The skies suddenly clear. For 27 agonizing minutes, an eerie, bleeding silence falls over the shattered decks of the USS Liberty. But this pause is not a retreat. It is a tactical reset. The assassins know the clock is ticking, and the slow bleed of an aerial strafing run is no longer viable. To the Naval Damage Control Officer, trapped in the suffocating heat of the lower decks, the silence is a false dawn. The air smells of burning cordite and diesel fuel. Through the warped steel of the hull, a new vibration registers. It is not the supersonic scream of jet engines, but a low, guttural thrum echoing through the water. The sea surface is boiling. The hunters are closing in for the kill shot. You have to understand the forensic difference between harassment and execution. Aircraft drop rockets to blind a ship, to remove its eyes and ears. But to erase a vessel entirely from the map, you must break its spine. The transition from an aerial assault to a coordinated naval engagement proves one undeniable fact. This was never about deterrence. The explicit intent from the start was to sink this ship and leave no witnesses. Emerging from the smoke haze, 3 motor torpedo boats streak toward the crippled vessel at high speed. We are no longer dealing with the anonymity of supersonic jets. These are surface combatants, closing the distance, looking directly at a smoking, practically stationary American ship. They are close enough to read the hull numbers, close enough to see the blood on the decks. In a desperate bid for survival, the surviving bridge crew fires a standard recognition flare high into the clear Mediterranean sky. This is the universal, undeniable maritime signal of a non-combatant vessel in distress. It is a plea for quarter. The response from the approaching Israeli surface forces is swift and mechanical. They ignore the flare and launch a spread of 5 torpedoes directly at the dying ship. A torpedo is not simply a bomb that hits a wall. It is an underwater earthquake. When it detonates against a hull, it uses the incompressible mass of the ocean itself to magnify the explosive force. The water becomes a solid hammer designed to crack the ship's keel and instantly flood the lower compartments. You do not survive a direct hit. You drown in the dark. Deep inside the vessel, the damage control officer braces against a bulkhead. Then, the ocean erupts. One of the torpedoes, carrying a warhead of over 600 pounds of high explosives, strikes the starboard side. The noise is a deafening, metallic crunch that shatters eardrums and bends the very framework of reality. The ship is violently thrown sideways, violently lifted, and slammed back down into the sea. This is where the geopolitical math becomes truly ruthless. The torpedo does not strike a random storage locker or a mess hall. It directly hits the ship's most heavily populated, highly classified compartment, the National Security Agency research space, the absolute epicenter of American electronic intelligence in the Middle East, is pulverized in a single, targeted blast. The physics of the impact are absolute. The blast wave rips a massive wound into the starboard hull, creating a jagged hole measuring exactly 39.4 feet wide. Steel plating is folded back like wet paper. In that split second, the protective barrier between the highly sensitive intelligence center and the crushing weight of the Mediterranean Sea completely ceases to exist. The ocean does not pour in, it detonates inward. Water blasts through the 39.4-foot breach at hundreds of pounds of pressure per square inch. It is a wall of black water, carrying twisted shrapnel, shattered equipment, and highly classified databanks. The lower decks are instantly transformed into a churning, lightless centrifuge of destruction. For the intelligence specialists trapped inside the research space, there is no time to react, no time to reach the emergency hatches. The violence is absolute and instantaneous. 25 highly trained American cryptologists and linguists are killed in a fraction of a second. They are crushed by the hydrostatic shock wave before the water even has a chance to drown them. Stripped of its buoyancy, the USS Liberty immediately takes on a severe 10-degree list to starboard. Gravity becomes the enemy. The deck tilts violently, sending surviving crew members, debris, and the bodies of the fallen sliding toward the flooded side. The ship is dying, rapidly losing its equilibrium, groaning under the immense, unnatural weight of the sea, tearing at its internal bulkheads. Down in the dark, the damage control officer is fighting a losing war against the laws of physics. Emergency red lights pulse through the thick smoke. The water is knee-deep and rising fast, slick with diesel fuel and blood. Men are desperately trying to shove mattresses, clothing, anything they can find into the massive breach, but the ocean cannot be stopped with fabric. The hardest decision in naval combat is the math of sacrifice. To save the ship, the damage control teams must abandon the flooded compartments. They are forced to slam and dog down the heavy steel watertight doors, sealing off the lower decks. They lock the ocean out, but they also lock their dead and dying crewmates in. It is a brutal, calculated amputation to keep the hull afloat. The watertight seals hold. Against all structural odds, the vessel stops sinking, stabilizing its list just short of a fatal capsize. The torpedo boats circle, realizing their prey has stubbornly refused to die. But the ship is utterly paralyzed, a burning wreck dead in the water. The crew has done the impossible, buying just enough time for the 6th Fleet rescue planes to arrive. Or so they believe. The watertight doors hold, and the mutilated ship stubbornly refuses to sink, buying precious minutes. Hundreds of miles away, that single, desperate distress signal finally breaks through the static of the jammed frequencies. On the flight deck of the USS Saratoga, the response is visceral and immediate. The United States Navy is a massive, coiled spring wired for one absolute reflex. You never abandon a vessel under fire. The cavalry is coming. Heavy Phantom fighter jets, fully loaded with air-to-air missiles, roar down the steam catapults. They are thrust into the Mediterranean sky, tearing through the sound barrier to intercept the attackers. Down in the carrier's Combat Information Center, a signals intelligence operator watches the radar tracks. The blue dots of the Phantoms are streaking toward the crippled Liberty. The timeline of survival is now just a matter of minutes and miles. But this is where the standard military equation violently breaks down. The most terrifying threat to the men bleeding out in the water is not the circling torpedo boats, but an invisible anomaly happening in Washington. The Phantoms are airborne. The target is locked. Yet an unprecedented power is about to reach across the ocean and strangle the rescue mission mid-flight. We are looking at a geopolitical paradox where the logical response is intentionally short-circuited. Upon receiving the Liberty's transmission, the commanders of both the USS Saratoga and the USS America executed their primary directive, scrambling their fastest strike aircraft to defend the helpless intelligence ship. To the tactical operators monitoring the boards, this is a routine application of overwhelming force. You hit our asset, we annihilate yours. But as the jets accelerate toward the Sinai coast, a secure line rings in the command center. This is not a tactical update. According to the sworn testimony of Rear Admiral Lawrence Geiss, the commander of the 6th Fleet Carrier Group, the voice on the other end of the line delivered a direct, incomprehensible order. The strike aircraft were to be immediately recalled. They were told to stand down. For a flag officer in the middle of a hot combat scenario, receiving an order to abandon American sailors to a slaughter is psychological whiplash. Admiral Geiss, a seasoned combat veteran, flatly refused to accept the order at face value. In standard operating procedure, pulling back a rescue force while the distress beacon is still screaming is tantamount to treason. He protested the recall, demanding clarification, assuming there had been a catastrophic miscommunication in the chain of command. He pushed the issue up the ladder, insisting that the jets continue their intercept vector until a higher authority intervened. The escalation bypassed standard naval command and went straight to the top of the geopolitical pyramid. Admiral Geiss was patched directly to the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. And when the admiral refused to back down, the line was handed over to the commander-in-chief. President Lyndon B. Johnson picked up the phone. The intelligence operator monitoring the encrypted channel is about to hear the cold, brutal math of a superpower protecting its global chessboard. President Johnson's response to the admiral is one of the darkest recorded sentences in modern military history. He reportedly stated that he did not care if the ship sank to the bottom of the ocean. He would not embarrass an ally. The geopolitical alliance was deemed infinitely more valuable than the lives of the 34 American citizens being hunted in the Mediterranean. The order was absolute. The rescue mission was dead. High above the ocean, the Phantom fighter jets received the abort code. The pilots, fully armed and minutes away from engaging the torpedo boats, are forced to bank sharply away from the column of black smoke rising on the horizon. They pull their throttles back and turn their noses toward the carriers. To the signal's intelligence operator watching the radar screen, it is a sickening realization. The blue dots are retreating. The United States government actively chose to look the other way, classifying the crew of the Liberty as acceptable collateral damage. The ship was a floating hard drive filled with inconvenient truths, and Washington decided it was politically cheaper to let it sink. This is the anatomy of a perfect geopolitical cover-up. It is not just about keeping secrets. It is about actively managing the murder of your own personnel to maintain a strategic advantage in the Middle East. For the sailors trapped in the flooded compartments, the roar of the Phantom jets never comes. The sky remains empty. The Liberty crew is left completely alone, dead in the water, forced to face their attackers for another agonizing hour with no hope of reinforcement. The psychological terror of realizing your own country has left you to burn is a trauma that no metal hull can withstand. The state has calculated their value, and their value is exactly 0. We are reconstructing a crime scene that the highest levels of government tried to erase from history. If this forensic breakdown of military betrayal and the cold reality of geopolitical math is opening your eyes, hit subscribe and like this video to support our ongoing open-source intelligence investigations. Do you think the crew ever suspected they were expendable? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because the cover-up is only just beginning. The Sixth Fleet stood down, tethered by an invisible leash of international diplomacy. The burning vessel was left to the mercy of the torpedo boats, an unwanted witness to a war it was never supposed to fight. As the smoke chokes the Mediterranean sky, the surviving intelligence specialists on board realize they are no longer sailors in the United States Navy. They are a geopolitical liability, and the process of their erasure has already been officially authorized. But the crime scene was not truly 1942. But the crime scene was not truly isolated. While the politicians actively chose blindness, someone else was watching from the stratosphere. The signals intelligence operators never stopped recording. Step inside a claustrophobic audio forensic laboratory in 2026. The air smells of ozone and old magnetic dust. I am watching an analyst spool a fragile reel-to-reel tape. On the monitor, the jagged peaks of a digitized waveform pulse in stark white against a black background. This is the anatomical structure of a lie. You can order a fleet to turn around. You can let a ship sink into the Mediterranean, but you cannot erase a radio wave once it bounces into the atmosphere. The sky is the ultimate witness, and it remembers everything. We are hunting for the voice of the assassin. We do not have to guess what the attackers were thinking. Because high above the slaughter, safely out of range of the 30mm cannons, a United States Navy EC-121 spy plane was orbiting in the thin, freezing air. This massive 4-engine aircraft was an airborne listening post, soaking up the tactical radio traffic of the entire Middle Eastern theater. For decades, the data captured by that plane was buried deep within classified vaults. It took until the year 2003 for the National Security Agency to finally declassify the raw audio transcripts of that afternoon. These intercepts dragged the ghosts out of the archives and put them right here on the laboratory monitors. Through the eyes of the airborne intercept operator, the reality of the strike is completely different. Sitting in a pressurized cabin, bathed in the amber glow of equipment racks, the operator is not blind. They are listening to the exact, unfiltered communications bouncing between the attacking fighter jets and their ground control. Back in our laboratory, the forensic analyst hits play. The static clears. The Hebrew chatter of the fighter pilots begins scrolling across the screen as stark translated subtitles. The voices are not panicked. They are not confused by the glare of the sun or the chaos of combat. The tone is chillingly methodical and completely aware. The mistaken identity defense crumbles right here, instantly pulverized by the raw audio data. The pilots are looking through their crosshairs directly at the target. They are assessing the vessel, examining its unique, antenna-heavy silhouette, and observing the massive American flag snapping in the wind above the smoke. The waveform spikes sharply on the monitor. A pilot transmits a clear, unambiguous visual confirmation back to his commanders. The translated text flashes on the screen, verifying the absolute worst-case scenario. The pilot states flatly and without hesitation, "It is an American ship." He knows exactly who he is about to kill. The audio track falls silent for a fraction of a second. It is a terrifying pause. The operator up in the spy plane waits for the ground controller to abort the strike, to realize the catastrophic error. Instead, the response comes back, devoid of emotion. Never mind, hit her. The execution is officially green-lit. 4 words. Never mind, hit her. That phrase transforms a tragic, fog-of-war accident into a state-sanctioned assassination. The attackers are not just following protocol, they are actively overwriting it. Down on the surface, the violence immediately shifts from a tactical neutralization to a total eradication protocol. The naval attackers move in for the final cleanup. They do not just fire at the hull, they systematically target the Liberty's deployed life rafts, shooting them to pieces in the bloody water. This is a profound, undeniable violation of international maritime law. You only destroy life rafts when the geopolitical equation requires 0 survivors. This intercept did not vanish into an administrative black hole. The audio proof of the execution, confirming the deliberate targeting of an American vessel, was packaged, encrypted, and routed directly to the desk of the director of the National Security Agency in Washington. The highest levels of the intelligence apparatus had the confession on tape. The intelligence was absolutely pristine. The forensic evidence was undeniable. And yet, the official United States government stance instantly solidified around the tragic mistake narrative. The empirical truth of the intercepts directly threatened the strategic architecture of the Middle East, so the truth was quietly suffocated. You are looking at the ultimate bureaucratic betrayal. The crime scene is soaked in blood, the weapon is smoking, and the murderers are caught on tape admitting to the kill. But the precinct chief just turned off the lights and locked the door. The evidence exists, but the system refuses to acknowledge it. Now, we have to figure out exactly why. The evidence exists, locked in the archives, but the system actively refuses to acknowledge it. We have the crime, the weapon, and the audio confession permanently etched on magnetic tape. Now, we must step back from the blood-stained decks and look at the historical logistics to establish the actual motive. Why did the Liberty have to die? The answer is not found in the water, but on a tactical map of the Sinai Peninsula. Look at the shifting front lines of this conflict. Troop columns are advancing rapidly across the desert, rendering previous borders obsolete. The visual here is a rapidly ticking clock, a countdown to a massive regional shift. This brings us to the math of murder. Why bite the hand of the superpower that feeds you? Because that hand is holding a telephone, and it is about to stop your army from capturing the absolute high ground. The attack did not happen in a vacuum. It occurred exactly on the 4th day of the highly volatile 6-day war. The local Allied military had just crushed its southern opposition and was rapidly pivoting its armor north. They were aggressively preparing to launch a massive, highly controversial ground offensive directly into the Syrian-controlled territory known as the Golan Heights. This was a critical frontline expansion that carried immense global risk. The United States government was strongly opposed to this specific escalation. Washington was terrified of drawing the Soviet Union into a direct, catastrophic proxy war in the Middle East. The White House was actively monitoring the region, desperate to maintain diplomatic leverage over both sides and enforce a ceasefire. To control the battlefield, the superpower needed absolute visibility, and that visibility was anchored entirely offshore. This is where the floating electronic fortress becomes a fatal liability to its own allies. The highly sophisticated listening equipment aboard the Liberty was not just passively recording static, it was a highly tuned tripwire. The ship was positioned perfectly to intercept the encrypted telemetry of entire armored divisions, mobilizing for the northern strike. Every tank commander's radio check, every artillery coordinate, was bleeding into American headsets. If those intercepts were beamed back to Washington, the element of surprise would instantly evaporate. The United States would have possessed the necessary advance warning of the troop movements rushing toward the Golan Heights. With that data, the American president could have simply picked up the red phone, threatened to sever military aid, and forced an immediate halt to the Allied offensive before the first tank crossed the border. You're looking at a brutal tactical deadlock. The attacking nation is staring at a historic, rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure its northern border. But right in their backyard, a massive American intelligence asset is acting as a global whistleblower. To secure the high ground, the advancing army cannot afford for the United States to intervene. The survival of the Allied offensive directly requires the absolute silence of the American ship. The airstrike and the torpedo run were not acts of blind rage. They were surgical operations designed to sever a geopolitical optic nerve. By violently neutralizing the Liberty, the attacking forces effectively blinded the United States intelligence apparatus in the most critical theater of the war. They did not just kill 34 American sailors, they bought themselves a blackout. They purchased silence in the exact moment they needed to move their armor. Those crucial hours of forced American blindness were the exact currency required to change the map of the Middle East. While the surviving crew of the Liberty was frantically shoving mattresses into a flooded hull and begging a jammed radio for rescue, the northern offensive was fully unleashed. Thousands of troops and hundreds of tanks surged into the Golan Heights under the absolute cover of an engineered intelligence vacuum. I have tracked casualty reports across dozens of war zones, and the logic of the front line is always terrifyingly practical. When an Allied surveillance asset threatens the success of your most vital military operation, that asset immediately ceases to be a friend. It becomes an operational hazard. The strike on the ship was the necessary cost of doing business. The blood spilled in the Mediterranean was simply the down payment for the territory gained in the north. This execution was an incredibly audacious, mathematically calculated risk. The aggressor recognized that they could brutally destroy the offshore surveillance node, officially claim absolute ignorance, and simply bet the house on the geopolitical architecture. They gambled that the strategic alliance between the two nations was far too valuable for Washington to fracture over a single destroyed ship. They wagered that the superpower would simply swallow the loss. And the terrifying reality of this frontline equation is that the gamble paid off perfectly. The Allied forces secured their strategic objective on the ground, while the American president actively aborted the aerial rescue mission overhead. The geopolitical alliance forced Washington to accept a heavily fabricated apology rather than demand justice. The superpower looked at the smoking wreckage of its own ship, checked the strategic balance sheet, and chose compliance. You are witnessing the ultimate triumph of statecraft over human life. The tactical objective was achieved, the borders were redrawn, and the intelligence leak was permanently plugged with high explosives. But the violence of the strike is only the first half of the equation. Now, the massive bureaucratic machine must activate to sanitize the massacre. The bodies are still warm, but the operation to erase them from history is already fully underway. The physical attack has ended. The shattered hull of the ship is limping back to port, bleeding oil into the Mediterranean. The geopolitical motive is brutally clear. But the war is not over. The state machinery is just waking up. We are shifting from the chaos of a naval strike to the calculated defense of the status quo. The front line has moved from the flooded decks of a dying vessel to the polished mahogany tables of the Capitol. You are no longer dodging shrapnel. You are inside a sterile, brightly lit hearing room in Washington, D.C. Men in immaculate dress uniforms sit shoulder to shoulder. The air smells of fresh ink and ozone from the copy machines. Heavy stamps slam down on manila folders, branding them top secret. A fountain pen deliberately crosses out an entire paragraph in an intelligence report. This is the quiet, bureaucratic violence of a cover-up. I need you to understand the bureaucracy of betrayal. A state-sponsored crime is never actually over when the shooting stops. The guns going silent is just phase 1. The true kill is executed when the final paperwork is filed and sealed. The anomaly we face now is terrifyingly human. You have a ship full of bleeding, angry witnesses. How does a superpower systematically silence an entire crew to protect an international intelligence asset? The counteroffensive began immediately. The United States Navy urgently convened a court of inquiry. This is the highest level of maritime investigation, tasked with forensically dismantling the disaster. It was headed by Admiral John S. McCain, Jr. The objective was officially to find the truth. But on this new front line, truth is just another variable to be managed. The orders were passed down. The investigation was put on a stopwatch. Look at the timeline. A standard naval inquiry into a multi-casualty event takes months of painstaking reconstruction. This court produced a massive, supposedly definitive report in exactly 1 single week. 7 days. That is an unprecedentedly short time frame for an incident of this magnitude. It was a tactical sprint to lock down the official narrative before the press or the public could start asking dangerous, unanswerable questions. The official inquiry delivered its fatal blow to reality. They concluded the strike was nothing more than a tragic, chaotic case of mistaken identity. They formally accepted the claim that the attacking forces confused the heavily modified intelligence gatherer with an obsolete Egyptian transport ship named El Qusair. The gavel fell. The government stamped the lie into the historical record. This conclusion is a direct assault on the laws of physics. It defies basic optics. You have seen the vessel. The Liberty was twice the size of the Egyptian transport. It sported a vastly different, top-heavy silhouette, literally bristling with towering microwave communication arrays. You do not mistake a highly advanced floating antenna for a rusted horse carrier on the clearest day of the year. The official report was a fabricated alibi. But the physical evidence did not matter anymore. The narrative was poured in concrete. Now, the machine had to aggressively plug the human leaks. The surviving crew members were pulled from the wreckage. These are men who just watched their friends vaporized by Allied rockets. They were forced into closed-door briefings. The military did not offer them trauma counseling. It handed them a direct, chilling ultimatum from the highest command. I have read the testimonies. These bleeding, traumatized sailors were explicitly threatened with immediate courts-martial and severe federal imprisonment if they ever spoke a word about the attack. The gag order was absolute. They were forbidden from discussing the 2 hours of hell with the press. They were barred from telling their own wives. They were ordered to look their children in the eye and lie about how their shipmates were slaughtered. Geopolitical silence always comes with a literal price tag. You cannot just bury 34 bodies without balancing the international ledger. The attacking government eventually opened its checkbook to settle the account. They paid $3.3 million in financial compensation directly to the grieving families of the men killed. It is a sterile, calculated transaction. A cold payout to make the international diplomatic nightmare disappear. The transaction did not stop at the dead. They wired an additional $3.5 million to compensate the 171 wounded survivors. Look at the raw mechanics of this alliance. It operates exactly like a syndicate. This is the geopolitical equivalent of blood money. Millions of dollars pushed across the table to grease the gears of diplomacy and ensure the front line of the Cold War remained completely intact. The contagion of this cover-up infected everything it touched. Even the ultimate symbol of American military valor was quietly sanitized. The ship's commander, Captain William McGonigal, survived the bridge being shredded by 30mm cannons. He kept his shattered, sinking vessel afloat through sheer force of will. For his actions under fire, the government was forced to award him the Medal of Honor. But they could not risk the optics. Normally, the Medal of Honor is draped around a hero's neck by the president in the Oval Office, bathed in the flash of 100 cameras. Not this time. For decades, the true nature of his award was buried. McGonigal received his medal quietly, hidden away at a local Navy yard. The ceremony was intentionally downgraded and isolated specifically to avoid drawing any media attention to the crime. The state honored the man, but it erased his battle. The medals were locked in drawers, the gag orders were signed, and the physical evidence of the crime was quietly dismantled. I watched the archive footage of the USS Liberty in a dry dock, its shattered hull being slowly cut apart for scrap metal by industrial blowtorches. They erased the vessel, but the scar it left on our reality remains. Today, that rusted steel has been replaced by silent data centers and orbital satellite arrays, but the machinery of betrayal is exactly the same. We began this investigation looking for a tragic accident in the Mediterranean. Instead, we found a cold, mechanical equation. 34 American sailors were killed, and 171 were wounded. Yet, this remains the only major attack on a United States Navy ship denied a comprehensive congressional investigation. The ghost of the Liberty haunts every intelligence operation. It proves conclusively that sovereign states do not have friends. They only have calculated interests. The forensic reality we uncovered, the jammed frequencies, the intercepted communications, the targeting of life rafts, shatters the illusion of diplomatic morality. This is the brutal lesson of shadow geopolitics. When empirical truth conflicts with the strategic needs of an empire, the truth will be reclassified and buried. If this intelligence breakdown changed how you view the global chessboard, leave your verdict in the comments and subscribe to continue the research with us. In our digital age, where algorithms and autonomous drones dictate the theater of warfare, the human element is more expendable than ever. You are a variable in a geopolitical algorithm. Your uniform and your flag are not shields. They're simply data points on a tactical map. You are only ever as safe as your geopolitical convenience allows. The casualties are counted, the storm has passed, and the file goes to the archives. Signing off.